We'll get started here in just a second. Okay, it looks like everything is started. Appreciate it. Hopefully, y'all can hear me. I am Dusty. I am one of the co-founders of Cowork Health. Cowork Health, we consider ourselves a Achmed relationship management platform that helps you digitize your Achmed billing, invoicing, payments, and communication. And so that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about giving you some actionable insights and tools that you can take back and use, hopefully to help grow your Achmed and or urgent care practice. And so I have some great guests with us today. I have Ira and Dave from Web for Doctors. Ira and Dave are marketing and advertising professionals with a combined 50 years of experience, more than 50 years, honestly. They work with urgent care and occupational medicine practices to grow their patient volume and improve their bottom lines. And they typically do this by leveraging a mix of digital and traditional marketing efforts tailored to the needs of each specific client. So today I'm going to hand it over to Ira and Dave, and they're going to walk through hopefully some very specific ways that you can take this back and grow your practice. Ira, Dave, hand it off to you.
Thanks, Dusty. Let's see. Oh, did you just do that or did I change it?
That was me. I changed it for you, but you should have control now.
All right. I wasn't sure. I was about to click and it all of a sudden moved. I wasn't sure how sensitive this thing was, this platform was. All right. So today we're going to be talking about your occupational medicine strategic marketing plan. And the ultimate goal of your marketing plan should hopefully be to maximize your patient volume each and every month. Of course, that doesn't mean necessarily the exact same amount every month, but whatever sort of the maximum available patient volume is going to be to you in each season or month of the year, we want to help you maximize that. As Dusty mentioned, Web for Doctors is a marketing agency. At the end, we will have an offer to sort of let you know how you can work with us. But for today, figure out how to move this. What we're going to be talking about is, first of all, a little bit on why we go through a strategic planning process. And then we will be talking about the various components of your plan, the different elements that it should typically contain. And then finally, we'll be going over the talking about some of the information in your plan, talk about where you want to gather that from, and just kind of help you with some questions to reflect on your where you've come from so that you can put together the ideal plan going forward. And yes, you will be able to get a copy of the presentation. If it looks like Dusty already answered that, but in case anyone didn't see the chat. Oops. All right, so why is strategic planning important? Ultimately, because your mindset matters. As Benjamin Franklin said, by preparing to fail, you're preparing to, or by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. And we have seen over 1,000 studies that have consistently shown that setting high and specific goals is linked to increased task performance, persistence, motivation compared to vague or easy goals. So the science is behind this, that planning is important. So specifically with regard to your marketing plan, having a strategic thinking mindset is important. So we want to be thinking and planning versus simply waiting and reacting to kind of market conditions or other variables. So what we want to do to kind of get in this strategic thinking mindset is that we want to gather and study your data. You want to know where you're coming from so you know where you're going. You want to reflect on the gains and the wins and the progress that you have made based on looking at that data. And then kind of taking all of that into account, you want to create your plan and ultimately make improvements in your practice. And just to end this section with another fun quote from the great philosopher Yogi Berra, not to be confused with the equally great philosopher Yogi Bear. If you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. Alrighty, so let's look at the elements of a strategic plan. So first of all, your marketing strategy should define your brand and your core message and the KPIs that you're going to kind of measure to track your progress. It should include a situational as well, as well as competitive analysis, so that you kind of know where you stand in your market. And then that marketing strategy should also include recommended marketing tactics based on both your budget and an analysis of your baseline data. Now, we're going to go into each of these bullets in more detail in a moment here, kind of starting with that one element of that first bullet, which is the KPIs. And one of the most important things with with having a successful marketing program is to make sure that you are measuring your results. You know your numbers. You know what are the metrics you're looking for, and you have a plan to measure and evaluate those, so that ultimately those results show you where you are. You can go through a process of reviewing, analyzing, and optimizing. And ideally, this is in part via real-time insights if you kind of have the right dashboard set up that will give you, as I said, real-time information into into how well you're doing with new business development. All right, so the next section here, and digging into your plan, you want to make sure that you are defining with your branding and positioning, that you have branding guidelines, first of all, that define the visual identity of your company, of your practice. That will range from the logo to the color scheme and the fonts, really just making sure that everything is as consistent as possible visually. And then from the perspective of what you say, whether it's the written word on your website or the talking points that you use when you answer the phone, or when your sales reps are out talking to potential clients, you want to make sure that you're just using specific positioning guidelines that will describe your brand in a specific voice and tone, and with a kind of consistent message and language. And when you ultimately combine the branding and positioning together, you are able to best communicate your unique value proposition and how you fit into your market. Now, one note here, once you kind of have a branding and positioning statement and guidelines, you don't necessarily need to redo this every year by any means. But if you haven't really thought out these things before, it might be a little bit of a longer exercise. Then these are things that you would want to kind of look at on an annual basis to make sure nothing has changed, and to just reinforce that you're using them consistently. But these aren't things that necessarily change all that often. We'd consider them part of the foundation of your practice. Now, the competitive analysis, on the other hand, is something that may be changing because, of course, you may have new competitors open or close. You may have existing competitors that add or change their service line in some way. So your competitive analysis is ultimately going to be a study of your brand's competitors, but at all levels at which you work. So if you're only one level, then it's all the same, local and the company. But if you have multiple regions or even multiple states, then you would kind of have a company level, and then a regional level, and then the individual local level, where the competitive landscape or perspective may be a little different. And ultimately, with regard to your competitors, you want to understand their strengths and weaknesses so that you can identify and leverage your competitive advantage in your marketplace. All right, so getting to the end of this section on your marketing plan, and we're gonna make this. I've dominated the conversation here, but we'll be making this a little bit more interactive, both by involving Dave and Dusty, as well as hopefully getting some insight from you all in the next section here. But just have a couple more slides to kind of give you an overview of what the plan ultimately is going to look like. So these last two sections of your plan are going to be your tactics that you are going to use. And we've got these divided up into your demand generation and then what we call account-based marketing. So your demand generation is going to be kind of more of your mass media. So your advertising, it's going to include generally your website is going to be part of the demand generation process, as that is part of the search engine optimization process. So ultimately, and this is going to include a lot of online as well as traditional marketing and advertising, but largely where you need to kind of consider things with regard to demand generation is going to be within Google and LinkedIn, with both of those platforms that can involve advertising, but it doesn't necessarily have to involve advertising with either. With Google, as I mentioned, we're talking about just your website and having your website optimized for search engines. That will help get you exposure in Google when people are looking for your services. And then LinkedIn is going to be the natural social network where people, when they're looking for more information on a company or even potentially looking for resources in their local market, more and more they will turn to LinkedIn. And so ultimately, again, those are going to be the primary digital platforms where you want to have a media plan that certainly can extend to advertising, both in the case of Google and LinkedIn, but simply having an organic strategy to have a solid presence on each of those should be a important foundational part of your annual demand generation part of your plan. The other element of this, and this gets into crosses over from digital traditional, but is more likely to be on the traditional side, is where you get into kind of local or even hyper local advertising or sponsorships. So this could be anything from advertising, sponsoring local sports teams, or sponsoring a local Society for Human Resource Management event, or other things that are just unique or specific to the towns or communities, cities that you operate in, looking for unique local / hyper local advertising and sponsorship should be part of kind of your branding and awareness process of making sure that when your potential clients know or are in need of your services, that you're going to be among the leaders of the people that they find. Now, of course, if you are actively building an occupational medicine practice, you know that you generally can't just wait around for inbound leads to come to you. You need to take a more proactive outbound process, which I like to think of as account-based marketing, where we're targeting individual accounts or sometimes small groups of highly segmented accounts that are also high value targets typically. And we can really tailor both the marketing and sales outreach very specifically to the needs of the individual account, as that sounds. Have a couple of resources here that just kind of go into detail, since this concept, I think, would be pretty much what you would expect if you've been in occupational medicine business development for any period of time, but not everyone has necessarily heard that phrase, and just the way that account-based marketing can be thought of in this digital marketing age. There's some useful sort of follow-up articles that I shared in the presentation here. And so now, finally, we get to the hopefully most exciting part here, which is gathering some data for the strategic thinking that you all need to do as you are working on your marketing plans. So first of all, you should be thinking about the overall goals and objectives that you have for your practice. Those could be measured as KPIs, key performance indicators, or OKRs, which stands for objectives and key results, which essentially is a KPI that is tied to specific results. But regardless of exactly which methodology you use, you should have some metrics which you are measuring yourself on. And then ultimately, as you're doing your planning, you want to know what your numbers currently look like so that you can then set some goals and objectives for where you want them to be. Dave, I know you've got a lot of experience working with our clients, sort of identifying and measuring different KPIs that are important to different practices. Do you want to give us some, add a little bit to that?
Sure. For when we look at an OCMED sales program that we're doing for our clients, we set up different KPIs as we go along. So if we started off a campaign with, for instance, a list of leads from a database, the first KPI is to identify the decision maker. And then that would be followed by making sure that we have that all of the decision makers' contact information, being their direct dial, email, and LinkedIn profile. Then the next level KPI is how many conversations we've had with decision makers. And then followed by meetings, followed by any kind of an agreement to do business. Like that could be either having, if the practice does do some sort of an agreement, then a signed agreement, but in most cases it's having paperwork filled out. And then the final metric is actually patients walking in the door. And as you can figure, that in occupational medicine, with its lengthy sales cycle, that there can be snags through any step of the processes. And that's why we actually go all the way to patients walking in the door before we consider it a close or a successful client. Does that cover what you're looking for, Ira? Hello?
Oops, sorry about that. I was muted. So yeah, ultimately we want to be measuring the bottom line as much as possible, but we're going to measure kind of key clues along the way, which is ultimately, in this case, it's the amount of information we've gathered about the decision makers and how much of a relationship we've built in the process of closing that deal.
It's really a way of figuring out where your snags are, because you can start to see in different campaigns, you'll start to see where things start to fall off, and then you figure out how to fix it. It's like, we have a lot of decision maker contacts, but we're not getting a lot of conversations, or we're having a lot of conversations, but we're not getting we're not getting as many closes as we have in prior campaigns. So it can be that will help you to narrow in on a solution,
where the bottleneck or where the obstacle is, by tracking the flow, the pipeline and the flow along the way. So,
exactly.
All right. So, all right. So next, and by the way, so we'll spend a little more time on some of these than others. Some of these are going to be kind of unique to your own practices, so it may be a little harder to have a general conversation about them, but kind of just so you can kind of identify in the slides, when you see those, the ones that don't have a blue, that don't have a blue background on the heading, those are the ones that I kind of considered more unique to individual practices, whereas the ones that have a white text on blue background are the ones where there was kind of some more general learnings that I thought we could reflect on. That said, the marketing budget is obviously on some level, or on a lot of levels, is going to be specific to each specific practice. What I think is important is just to have a philosophy on how you determine your marketing spend. So whether that is just on having a budget that you increase by a certain amount each year, which is kind of a traditional sort of standard way to measure measure your marketing, or if you're looking for something where you're looking at the target price, how much you will pay to acquire a new account, or how much you will pay for a new lead. But so if there's some kind of performance metric within how you set your marketing budget, but ultimately you want to have a philosophy in how you determine your budget, and then using that, kind of do your best to establish what it will be in the coming year, so you can make sure you have enough set aside when the time comes. Dave or Dusty, any thoughts on how to ideally establish marketing budgets in ACMED?
But my only thought, and I think there's a little something about this in one of the later slides, is that as you're thinking about your plan, thinking about it annually, and really not looking at your budget on a month-to-month basis, or any kind of plan, or any kind of sales or marketing plan. Looking at it like at a quarter, looking at it quarterly or monthly is just because of the nature of sales, and that it really it takes time to build these relationships. So if you're looking at something and looking at saying, okay, I'm going to try this for 3 months and then see if it works or not, chances are you're not going to find any ROI doing that. You're going to start to be looking at it at, you're going to be like 10 weeks in, and then deciding if you're going to renew, keep going with that plan for another quarter. And chances are you're not going to feel like you've generated enough ROI to continue. So, excuse me. So it's really looking at everything on an annual basis. And also what's very important is considering that if you have the processes in place that you can bring on new clients and be maintaining and growing them on an annual basis, you'll be able to, your ROI will expand year after year, even after, if you're if after the first year the ROI isn't there on your marketing budget, but you built up a base of accounts, that those accounts are going to stay there for the following year, as well as you're going to keep growing and adding new accounts. So it's really getting into that mindset of continual growth, as opposed to thinking about anything on a monthly, quarterly basis, or looking for that ROI immediately.
Yeah, I would say that especially on the occupational medicine side, there some of what Dave just said. There's levers that we can pull and buttons we can push with regard to online ads that, for example, on the urgent care side of things, for those of you in hybrid practices, you can make things happen a little bit quicker, sometimes a lot quicker. But with occupational medicine, you've got longer sales cycles, and it also means that once you get clients, you tend to keep them for a longer time. So there is a much greater lifetime value of those customers. All right. So any thoughts about your marketing, about the ideal occupational medicine marketing team, and what is done in-house versus what might be done outsourced, and how is an occupational medicine practice or an urgent care that's adding locations that offers occupational medicine, how do you scale as you grow a practice? Some of the questions you can ask yourself are, what are my existing team or employees great at, and where are we not currently meeting the mark? That all said, Dave or Dusty, any thoughts on observations you've had about kind of what makes the ideal, not just marketing team, but OcMed team in general?
Yeah, I think part of this goes to the last slide too, where a lot of it's going to depend on your current state of the business, especially if you're like a urgent care combined with an Occ Health type business model. What's your funding source, right? Are you funded and have some runway there, or are you a solo practice, and you're funding it as you go? I think a lot of that's going to depend on what makes your strategy then. And so you might need to hustle and dedicate, half a person's time to get one or two big clients to see what makes sense for your clinic, what's really out there. And then that will help fund you going forward. Or if you're funded and you're a larger group, maybe that's where you can have a more dedicated team that's actually going out and selling these services. And I think in Occ Health, what's different than that versus like other healthcare marketing is, it is basically B2B sales, like you're saying, where you need to attack specific accounts, account-based marketing, and you can be very specific with your messaging and making it sound like you're going to treat each client like a VIP. Obviously, that's the goal, but the more you can communicate with each account individually about what you can do for them. And we have previous webinars with other consultants kind of reiterate the same stuff, where it's like, hey, the more you can talk about what you can do for them and the troubles you're going to take off of their plate, the HR person's plate, and replace it with what you're doing, that's how you start selling and getting those groups in. And then from there, what Ira and Dave are saying is, then you can bring things online, bring out that brand authority expansion by going online. There's a lot of ways to compound that growth as you go. To get started in your Occ Health program, it's like any other B2B sales in my mind. It's a lot of hustle, a lot of extra hours, extra time, and then from there, hopefully you compound and grow it other ways.
That's great points. I would just like to add that on the sales side, you really need to define roles in the sales into like two segments, one being the prospecting and the other being the nurturing and closing. Because what we find is that there's if you really need to have the right people in the right position. If you for the prospecting position, you really need somebody that has those skill sets of being fearless and is not afraid to call people that they don't know and start a conversation. And that's not, it's not for everybody, because the challenging thing, especially in a smaller organization, is that everybody you can't necessarily have one person dedicated to doing this. So you might have people that are serving multiple roles, and one of them is going to be prospecting for new clients. And if they're not comfortable doing, that's something that they're not exactly comfortable doing, you're going to find that that's always going to end up on the bottom of the list. And so you need to make sure that you have the right person in that role, and that there's certain expectations for daily or weekly new client calls, meetings, emails, whatever, however you want to communicate, but that there is that there is expectations, and that is happening. Otherwise, none of the rest of the process will happen. I guess that's what the thing that I wanted to mostly add.
Okay. And I guess just the final note I'll make as far as the team is, in the couple decades that we've been doing this, and the dozens, if not hundreds, of Occ Health practices that we've worked with, I've rarely seen two that are alike, as far as just the configuration of the personnel within especially ACMED organizations, and especially on the administrative marketing side. The way that you divide up the labor is going to just depend on the unique personalities and the team that you have, but it does take a team approach ultimately to get great results. All right, so here's a slide or two that relates to what I was talking about earlier regarding your branding and positioning. This is one that I don't know that there's as much that we're gonna go over here, but ultimately you want to be looking at your brand and how your core competencies and unique selling points define you within the market, and how your unique story and culture of your brand can be leveraged to set you apart from your competitors. With regard to your target market, I guess the note here is that, well, there are kind of some fairly standard occupational medicine services and worker injury care that ACMED practices typically offer. The areas that you are best at may vary, and the opportunities within your market based on the type of companies that there are, and the competition you have, and where the sort of openings in the market will vary. So your ideal customers aren't necessarily just everyone who needs ACMED services. There are likely specific subsets of those customers or potential customers that would be most likely to do business with you. Now, one of those factors is going to be how close they are to you. And when it comes to getting those first ACMED clients, really targeting your immediate neighbors is one of the pieces of advice that I always like to focus on. But beyond that, again, as you're reaching out to people, whether it's in segments or individual, you want to be focused on the right message for the right people, a person or a group of people, and the right tactics, meaning the right whether email or text message or phone or knocking on their door and visiting them in person is the right way to get someone's attention. You want to make sure you're using the right tactic or tactics for each person in your target. Oh, Dave, did you have something to say about that one?
Just, I mean, as you look at, I mean, for every market, there's some variables. Is how much do you want to focus on um, employer paid services versus workers' comp? That can have to do with the levels of reimbursements and the could be competition in the area, and also is the state employer directed? Is it a panel state? Is it employee choice? So you're going to look at, based on all those, you'll look at your approach to worker injury care differently, and how you market it. I mean, we could do an entire webinar on that alone. And yeah, I mean, and as you, one of the things is we find is, as you look through, is breaking you may find that in your market you can break down to find certain industries that you can get to very specific messaging that is tailored exactly to that industry, where you can which can build up your brand credibility and show that you understand their business. So for instance, we're working with in a market that has a lot of furniture manufacturing. So we're currently have a lot of messaging all about furniture manufacturing, which has really helped lend our client to be seen as an expert in that industry.
Right. So when we're sending outreach messages, or even some of the ads that they see, they are specifically speaking the language of and discussing the needs of people in that specific industry.
Right.
So, that gets down to that account-based targeting.
And it offers you an opportunity to, to name other, if your clients are willing to name other brands and show who you work with, which also adds to your credibility.
Yep. All right. So in the interest of time, this slide is similar to the one that I shared in the actual elements of your plan, and went into a little bit of detail there. But ultimately, you want to be looking at not just the competition for your brand, but the competition of each individual location, assuming you have more than one, and assuming there are big players in your area. That's going to be what people tend to associate urgent care with, those big players. So you really want to make sure you understand who they are and what their people's perception of them is in the market. And then just digging in a little bit more on that, there are the unique needs and details about each of your locations. So what is unique about one location versus what is typical for your brand? And how do you maybe do things a little different at that location as a result? Or how can and then that said, how can each location do more to support the central brand of the company? And to the degree that you do have multiple locations that may be competing against each other because of how close they are, what are you doing to take advantage of load balancing opportunities rather than having one of those locations be over busy? Or how else are you dealing with kind of that internal competition that you might face? All right, just a couple more slides here. Something to keep in mind and to make sure that we are considering with regard to our plans would be the risk and contingency plans. This is going to actually overlap a little bit with the risk and contingency plans that would be part of your annual HIPAA audits that you should be doing. But ultimately, to the degree that there are any risks that you face that we face as an industry, or any specific factors that are unique to your region, whether there's a strong concentration of one type of employer, and if that industry were to take a hit, how it would affect your Ahmed business, or other factors that might just be unique to you. You want to make sure that when you are doing your strategic planning, you are considering the potential risks that you may face, and seeing how you can ultimately turn those risks into opportunities, which you can do by putting proper feedback loops in place, so that you can monitor risks, know when changes are happening, and react and react based on that educated perspective, not reacting based on last minute reactions when we don't have a choice. Dave or Dusty, anything to add with regard to potential risks that we need to be aware of with regard to our sales and marketing?
Nope.
All right, so we will close then with a little reflection on our marketing tactics. What is the mix of digital versus local and traditional? We have seen practices that essentially don't believe in, or the owner might not believe in, the decision maker, in a lot of paid advertising, but they believe strongly in a boots on the ground sales process of building relationships in their local community. And we've seen the opposite, where people are very heavily weighted towards advertising. There isn't one right answer, and in any given market, it's not going to be the same as another. But even within a market, there can be different ways of having success. But ultimately, you want to have a logical mix of some digital and some traditional advertising and marketing as you do your Ahmed business development. And then you also want to have a mix of both performance marketing versus brand building. So what I mean by this is, are we advertising in a trade publication where maybe this would be something, a brand building might be something you do through a Society of Human Resource Management chapter, where you're keeping your brand in front of the relevant decision makers in the community, versus performance marketing is something where you are advertising on a pay-per-click term on Google, and for people that are very specifically looking, for example, for DOT physical, and they need it right now. So in performance marketing, you're looking for a result right now, versus brand building, it's a bit of a longer term play. One or the you want to have somewhat of a mix. The question is, what is that mix that's appropriate for you? And ultimately, by looking at those various mixes, how can we optimize our overall marketing spend? Dave or Dusty, any comments on budgets and mixes of marketing tactics and spend?
At this point, nope.
All right. So what does planning get us? Ultimately, the goal here is to maximize our patient volume as much as possible each and every month. And by having a plan in place, we give ourselves the best chance of getting there. And with that, we would like to encourage you to get going with your plans, and let you know if you would like our help, then, or potentially like to find out how we could help you. We can provide an occupational medicine marketing assessment. That's a complimentary session. And as part of that, we'll actually give you 25 sample leads, which include contact information of people in your market, to kind of give you an idea of the type of data that we work with. And you can learn more about this at our website or scan the QR code right here. And with that, we are open for any questions that you all might have.
Yes, if you have any questions, there's a chat in the interface. Hopefully you can find it. Feel free to put them in there. We'll wait for a minute or two, see if anybody does that. While we wait, the only thing I'd kind of reiterate on this is, and this wasn't the focus of this webinar, no doubt, but marketing brings people in the door, but then to keep them coming back and to get that word of mouth going, your product has to live up to what you're marketing, right? And we're not going to talk through everything in the webinar, but that I just want to reiterate to make sure, things we hear is, can you do full service Occumed stuff? Like, are you just a drug screen collection site, or can you actually do full service occupational health services? Can you do workers' comp on the other end of that when there's an injury? So what is the actual product, and making sure what you're marketing is lining up with what you're delivering. And then the other part of that, obviously we're partial at Cowork, but how you communicate, how frequently, the cadence, how responsive you are, all that stuff is a huge part of these things, because your employers, they're busy. They have a lot of stuff going on. And so if they have to wait days, weeks for a response to a question, to a result, or things like that, again, that's the stuff that is going to kill that relationship pretty quickly. So again, we're not talking about that today, obviously, but just want to right to the group.
It is relevant. It's very relevant, Dusty, in fact, and I'm glad you did bring it up, because I meant to do so myself, which is that Cowork is a competitive advantage. That if you and your practice are using Cowork, that gives you a competitive advantage as compared to as compared to potentially the other Occumed providers in your area. So the fact that you do have tools in place to improve your communication is one of the selling points that we would promote you on, or recommending leveraging as you promote yourself.
Yeah.
All right, I'm not seeing any questions come through. Anything else you guys want to kind of hit home before we end it here?
I think we're good.
Sounds good. Well, appreciate you all that joined us live. And if you're watching this later on the recording, thanks for doing that as well. Otherwise, we will hopefully see you all soon, and have a good week.
Have a good holiday, everybody.